the voice of the UK.
This is 5 Live Drive.
So sex education in schools has been a big theme this week. We've been hearing from lots of teachers on that, so we thank you for getting in touch. And here's another issue affecting some classrooms we wanted to shine a light on today. 1 in 7 teachers in England and Wales says a child has brought a weapon into their school, and 2/3 say a child assaulted another child in their school last term. That is according to the charity the Youth Endowment Fund. It's one of the reasons why they've come up with what they say is the first guidance for schools and colleges on dealing with violence. Jill LaRocque is head teacher of Saffron Valley Collegiate, and she spoke to Radio 4 earlier.
The top reason why young people are excluded is for persistent disruptive behaviour, but increasingly we certainly have seen permanent exclusions for bringing in a weapon, i.e. a knife, into school, which is like a code red. That's a no-no. Sometimes I would say that there isn't enough professional curiosity around that. So an example would be that of a young person who I know of who was excluded for bringing in a knife. And again, I understand that's part of the school's behaviour policy and that's a red line. That's something you don't do. But this was a student with an otherwise exemplary record, and this was his, as it were, first offence. And then later on, with a bit of professional curiosity that we were able to work with this young person on, it was found that the knife that he brought into school was a butter knife.
Let's talk to Jon Yates now. Jon is the Executive Director of the Youth Endowment Fund, and their guidance has 5 key points. Jon, good evening.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's good. It's such an important topic. And, it's really interesting because we're kind of running themes through the programme tonight. We were talking about sex education in schools, and it's so important to talk to people like you who understand what's going on. So let's just start with your survey and what you discovered, how big a problem is violence in schools right now.
That's right. So we at the Youth Endowment Fund surveyed about 9,000 teachers, and what came back was these 2 quite shocking statistics. About 2/3 of teachers saying that there's been an assault of a pupil on another pupil in the last term, not the last year, last term in their school, and 1 in 7 saying someone's brought a knife or a weapon into school. And I think it's really important that with these sort of serious things like violence, we just don't panic too much. So at the same time, we also ask teachers, would you describe your school as a safe or very safe or not safe or terribly unsafe place? 9 out of 10 teachers say their school is actually safe or very safe. So you've got to first say, well, how do those 2 things fit together? And I think they fit together like this, which is we have violence in our society. We often wake up in the morning or turn on the radio as we travel home and we hear about someone losing their lives. So we do have a problem with violence. And that does intrude into our schools, but it doesn't dominate our schools. In fact, our schools are one of the safest places. And most importantly, they're one of the places where things can be done to make sure we don't have to wake up in the morning and hear these horrible stories. So what we're doing with the advice of teachers and working really closely with head teachers and looking really hard at the evidence of what works is to say, well, what does work? What does make a difference?
Well, let's go through what works then and how that feeds into your 5 recommendations. What are you saying?
Yeah, so there's 5, as you say, there's 5 main recommendations. And with all of this, I really want to say it's not primarily the job of teachers to fix the problem we have with violence, but there are things that can be done. So what are they? The first and most important, which may sound so obvious, is we've got to worry about the children who are not even in school. So we've now got a situation post-COVID where over 100,000 children are missing half of all the lessons. So the first thing we have to do is get children back into school. It's much safer for children to be in school than for them to be outside on the streets, potentially being exploited or getting into trouble. So we need to do as much as we can to try and keep children in school. The second thing is there are always in schools children who teachers know, and teachers tend to know who they're worried about and who are potentially heading towards potentially getting excluded because of behaviour or getting into real difficulty with violence. And what the evidence says, and we've kind of all known in our heart all along, is what matters then is an adult you can trust. Most of us grow up and we have an adult we can turn to and rely on. For most of us, it's probably mum or it might be dad. But some children don't have that. And so the top priority is to try and get really good mentoring in to support those children. The third thing that can be really good is trying to help children develop some of their ways of just dealing with feelings that they have. Like being a teenager is really hard. It's rubbish at times. And actually dealing with anger and frustration is one of the things you learn as you grow up. But some children just don't develop that as well as others. And there's now really good evidence for what would be called, to use a bit of jargon, you call it social emotional training. And actually someone going in, I was in a school the other day where a youth worker, brilliant youth worker, is working with young men, group of young men, 13, 14, lovely lads, but have had some difficult things happen in their lives, to talk about what's it like to become a man, what's it like to be a man, what's it like to contribute to society. And that sort of program can make a massive difference. But what else? The final things, again, are nice, simple things. So the fourth one is get really clear about if there is violence around, where is it happening? Is it behind the bike shed? Is it just outside? Where is it actually happening? So I'll give you an example, really simple one. There was a school that we went to visit where they realised, just talking to pupils, that actually there was a real problem at a bus stop just about 100 metres away from the school. And kids would come out very safe in school, and then there'd often be fights there. And so what they did is they just changed where do staff stand as kids leave school, and they worked with a local youth work group to have a youth worker regularly being there, and they told the police every now and again would patrol. None of that is rocket science, but it's just doing the right thing. And then the final thing is, and this is really my favourite, is stop doing the things that don't work, or stop doing the things that there's no evidence for, because everyone's too busy for that. So let me give you an example. We've had cases where children are taken to visit prisons to see and try and learn from prisoners, to hear that this is where my life went wrong, don't make the same mistake. It sounds like a nice idea. It's actually, when we've evaluated it and tested it, it's a terrible idea.
Why is it a terrible idea?
Yeah, well, it is a terrible idea. And it leads to children, what it does is it makes children think, this is where you think I'm going to end up.
Right.
And therefore it makes children more likely to end up getting involved in crime and violence. So people are sometimes doing things for the right reasons, but actually making things worse. I'll give you one more.
Well, I just want to butt in for a second.
Yeah,
So time is against us. But I mean, all of these are fantastic suggestions. Do they take resources? Is this something? I mean, I guess mentoring, schools can reach out and say, OK, we want people to come in. We want people to give their time. But, we know how stretched teachers are, that actually a lot of what you're suggesting does take time and effort to put in place, doesn't it? I mean, can we throw all this into the mix without spending any more money?
I think it would depend on the school. So what's interesting is when we surveyed schools, we found that most schools are doing some of this stuff, but a lot of schools are doing some of the stuff that doesn't actually work. And so if you're a head teacher, if you're a governor of a school, what I'd encourage you to do is download the report, really easy to find, Youth Endowment Fund Education. That's all you have to Google search. And you can look and see, well, hang on, we seem to be doing some of these things that there's no evidence for. And actually we're spending quite a lot of time on those things. Let's first of all stop doing those things and then start doing the stuff that does work. Because we can't pretend there's an endless amount of resources. Schools are really stretched. So let's, for goodness sake, do the things that tend to work and not the other things.
Jon, great to have you on the programme. Really interesting research. Thank you for bringing it to us. Jon Yates there, Executive Director of the Youth Endowment Fund. And we know lots of teachers listen to 5 Live Drive. What do you think to what you've heard? Do text us 850